All right, now that we have some of that academic stuff taken care of, some of the basic information about files extensions, and all that kind of information, we're actually going to talk about some practical file operations that we have available to us in Python. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is actually getting access to some sort of a file. So again, I have this file, I love cats, I love dogs, or I love dogs, I love cats. I don't remember which direction it was. You choose which direction it is, whether you're a cat lover or a dog lover. But we have either I love cats, I love dogs, or I love dogs, I love cats, whichever direction you want. And we have that saved to a txt file, .txt. We know that .txt is the extension of that file. And inside of that .txt file, we have ASCII encoded binary. Okay, so they're binary values that can be converted to ASCII. Okay, so in Python, the way we're going to access that data is we're going to use this function called open. Now again, the open function, a lot like the input function, it is a standard library function that is automatically imported when you create your Python script. Okay, so you don't have to do any import statements to gain access to the open function. Now the open function, just like the input function, it's very obvious what it does. The input function takes input, the open function opens a file. Okay, so essentially what this open function is going to do is it's going to create a file object and it's going to associate it with some sort of a variable name so that we can mess around with it. And the general format that we have is the variable name of the file object, which we'll use like f, something very simple. And then we'll make the open call, right? The function call, and then in the parentheses we have two arguments that we need to throw into that function. Okay, first argument is the file name, and that's going to be in quotation marks. So that's going to be like seasondata.txt, or it's going to be populationdata.csv, or it's going to be cats and dogs living together .txt, right? So it's just a name that you're going to give it that's generally meaningful. Now, this second thing is mode, right? So the mode that we're going to have is we have three particular modes, and you can see right down here, we have RW and A. We have read only, we have write, and we have append, okay? So in order of safety, I guess I would put it, it goes read, append, write. Now, what I mean by safety is if you open a file in W mode, which means write, you are going to destroy the contents of the file. Okay, you are going to overwrite them completely. You are going to eliminate any data that you have stored. So if in any of these exercises, you're working through the coding and you're working through the coding and you're working through the coding and the file never retains information, what you want to be looking for is that W, because what's happening is you're opening it in write mode, which means you're just going to overwrite all the data that was already on that file. Okay, so the most safe mode is read. Okay, so read only means you can open that thing up, you can read everything out, but you can never make any changes. Okay, so that's a very, very safe mode. Append means you can open it up, you can't delete any of the stuff that's on there, but you can add stuff at the end of it. Okay, so that means you can change the file, but you can't erase any previous information. So if you don't have to add anything to a file, always open it and read only. Okay, and I will kind of expect that on your homeworks. I want you to open the files in read only if you don't have to write to them. If you have to write to them, I would love to see append, unless you absolutely have to overwrite the data. Okay, so again, the three modes that we have are R, W, and A. I want you to memorize those: read only, writing, and appending. Okay, so we're going to use the open function, we're going to give it a file name, and then we're going to go ahead and give it a mode. So that's kind of how you make that function call and sort of what that means. Now, again, one of the most important things about opening and closing files is where in the world those files are. Okay, it's actually I have a lot of students that struggle with this. In the file system, you're going to have different files in different locations. Okay, so like in your file system, your home directory, you're going to have like a desktop, you're going to have documents, you're going to have downloads, you have these different directories. You can go into the desktop, and then you can have another folder called, Python projects, and then a folder called Cyber 101. You need to, to be able to work with files, you need to be able to reference the path to actually open that. So one of the biggest mistakes that my students make is they'll try to open a file that does exist, but they'll try to open it from some nebulous place. They'll just put the name of the file into the open function and expect the Python interpreter to figure out where it's at. And that's not how it works, okay? You have to tell the Python interpreter exactly where to go to open that file. Okay, so if an open function receives a file name that doesn't contain a path, it'll just assume that it's in the same directory as the program. Now, what that means, let's jump over here to PyCharm. That means that here in my project chapter 6, if I just throw out an open command, and you'll see this because I'm going to code it for you. If I just throw out an open function call, it's going to assume that the file I'm looking for is in this chapter 6 folder. Okay, so if the open function receives a file name, we're going to assume that it's in the same directory as the program, right? Because I'm going to open this program in this folder, so it must be in the same folder. It must be in the same directory, okay? And I want you to get that through your head. If you want to put it in a different directory, you're going to have to use either absolute or relative paths. And I can mention that to you a little bit here, but I highly suggest that for this class, just put your files in the program or in the project folder, okay? Just put your files right there with the Python file that you're working on, okay? Don't make it complicated. If you want to play around with it, that's fine. But relative and absolute paths can get kind of confusing, and sometimes when you're just learning, it may not be the best idea, okay? So again, if the open function receives a file name that does not contain a path, it'll assume it's right there with it, okay? So if a program is running and a file is created, it is created in the same directory as the program unless you give it a path, okay? So you can specify an alternate path and file name in the open function argument, but if you just say it, it'll go ahead and put it in the same directory as the program. All right, so let's go ahead and look at this a little bit because it's been a lot of information. So let's actually see some coding. All right, so I have a fresh new project here. I don't have any files. I don't have anything in there. I mean, this all is just sort of native, created a new virtual environment kind of stuff, okay? So we're just going to close that virtual environment. That's just sort of making a new project, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Python file. So again, right-click on Chapter 6, New Python File. Okay, we're gonna call this file. Oops, we're just gonna call it file.io.py. Okay, this is where we're gonna mess around with our stuff. Now, because we're doing file.io, let's go ahead and create a file with something in it so that we can actually mess around with it. So again, I'm just gonna right-click. I'm gonna go to New, and I'm gonna create a file, and I'm just gonna call this, why don't we just call it io.txt? Okay, very simple little. Easy name, not typing a really long name here. And then we're just going to put a couple lines in here. I love cats. I love dogs. Maybe it's I love dogs and cats. Maybe it's I love dogs and cats and horses. Okay, there we go. It's just got some random information there. Now, what's important for you to know is because we're in PyCharm, it automatically saves it for you. Okay? If you're using it in a text editor, it will not automatically save it for you, okay? So remember, if you write something to a file not in PyCharm, you need to go ahead and save that before you do anything with it, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and just practice opening this thing up. Now, first thing I want to mention to you, and actually, we created a new file in it's in the same directory as chapter 6. Okay, so you see how we have the directory chapter 6, we have file.io.py, and then we have io.txt. See how they're both in the same directory? So they should have good access to each other. So let's just go ahead and mess around this. So obviously, as I've mentioned previously, we need conditionally executed main. Okay, so mi main. Okay, you guys should be really good at doing this by now. All right, and then I'm just going to type in pass, and we're going to run it and make sure everything's good to go. Everything looks good to go. All right, so let's go ahead and mess around with opening this file. Now, we know that we have the open function, okay? And the open function looks just like that. We saw that sort of in the slides. We obviously know how to call functions. It's the name of the function with parentheses. Now, we need 2 arguments to pass into this function. We need the name. Okay, so I'm going to use double quotes. Make sure you use those quotes. io.txt. Okay, so it's in the same directory over here, which means it'll gain access to it. Now, it needs another argument. Okay, and this is also in double quotes. You can also do single quotes, but I use double quotes generally. And we're going to do read only. Okay, so that's R. Read only is R. Now, this will work. I can just leave it like this, but there's really nothing I can do with that. So I need to go ahead and save that file object into a variable. Now, the way that we do that often is we'll just name it F. Okay, so this is the general way that we're going to do file opening. Now, if I wanted to open a different file, I could call it F1. I could also call this, F or, name file or address file or whatever that might be. You could be more specific on this name if you need to, but if it's a general file, you can call it F and that's fine. All right, so now that I have this function call all set up, let's go ahead and run it, make sure it doesn't have any errors. All right, looks like everything went fine. No errors, no problems. Okay, now you remember how I said for every open, there must be a close. Okay, I'm going to make you say that with me. For every open, there must be a close. Okay, how many opens do we have here? 1, correct. How many closes do we need? 1, correct. Okay, so I have opened io.txt as F. Now I need to close it. So the way that we close this is go f.close. Okay, so now I've opened it and I've closed it, and that is the appropriate way to deal with it. Okay, now I haven't done any of the processing, right? Because usually we're going to have some sort of a process here where we can mess around with the contents of it, correct? Okay, but we have done what we need to do in the sort of file management side of this thing. We have f equals open io.txt r. Now remember, this is the name that you give it. And then once I've opened it, I got to make sure that I close it. All right. So again, I want you to, in this little break that we're going to take right now, I want you to open up your PyCharm. I want you to make a conditionally executed main, and I want you to create a new TXT file, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5, and I want you to open them and I want you to close them. Make sure you're really, really comfortable with this. You might even open them at different modes because you have R, W, and A, read, write, and append. Okay, kind of just get familiar with this process and what it looks like, and then I will see you in the next video.